Welcome to Thoughts I'm Still Having, the podcast where we overthink pretty much everything until we either find an answer or completely exhaust the idea. I'm Olivia Britton, your host, and today I want to explore the thoughts that I'm still having about... Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Thoughts I'm Still Having. We are on episode 2. And man, I just want to say thank you so much for all of the engagement and the kind comments that I got on my first episode. It was so much fun to create, and I'm truly just enjoying this whole process. And so I appreciate all of your encouragements and kind messages as we just navigate through what this podcast may look like in the future. If you didn't listen to my last episode, hi, I'm Olivia. And we talked about the future, our idea of the future and what living in the future may look like. This episode, I really want to dive into something I kind of hinted at the end of that episode, which is perspective. What is perspective? How do we gain it? And when our perspective shifts, what does that mean and what does it look like? I'm going to dive into all these ideas today, so let's go ahead and get into episode 2 of Thoughts I'm Still Having. So what is perspective? Well, perspective can be a lot of things, such as your physical perspective on something. If you're looking at an object and you lean a little bit to the left or lean a little bit to the right, your visual perspective on that object has changed. You're now looking at the object in a different or new way. But more commonly in conversation, we talk about perspective rooted in a belief or the way that you view a social problem. Now, trust me, there's a lot of scientific ways that you can look at perspective, and these ideas of how we all see the world a little bit differently will really make you think. If you've never gone down the rabbit hole of people's perspectives of color, let me give you a homework assignment. There is this theory that we all see color differently, but we've been taught to have the same perspective on it. So for example, what I see as red, you may see as a different color, but we both have been taught that it's red. Does that make sense? This idea is pretty hard to explain only verbally. Basically, it's the idea that we've been taught that red is red and purple is purple. And even though I may see it completely differently than you do, we all agree that it's called red or purple or blue or brown or yellow or whatever, because that's what we were taught. So this theory is where I was going to take this episode. I was going to go really scientific on all these different things, but then right there, it just stopped me. And I started thinking about how, okay, well, if that's a perspective that is taught, what other perspectives in our lives are we merely taught rather than gaining? So when I mention perspective today, I want you to know that I'm focusing on perspective as a particular way of seeing, thinking about, or understanding something, because that side of our perspective is often shaped by our experiences, beliefs, and position, because this part of our perspective allows us to grasp the bigger picture or view situations a little bit more objectively. And we're going to go a lot deeper than, is the glass half empty or half full? That's another conversation. So when we talk about how we go about gaining perspective and whether or not it's taught to us, it's important to keep in mind that perspective is often taught both directly and indirectly. And once you start really thinking about this, you'll start picking up on things that have just always been your perspective. And it's really likely that these things were taught to you by some sort of influential figure in your life. That could be a parent or a grandparent or even a celebrity that you followed for a really long time to the point where you have a little bit of trust in them. So if they believe that, surely I need to believe that also. I mean, we've seen this again and again politically. How many political candidates nowadays get some sort of celebrity endorsement that directly influences the results at the polls? And this is where the social learning theory comes in. The social learning theory suggests that we acquire perspectives through observation and modeling after our significant others. This theory emphasizes the role of social interactions and influential figures such as our parents or peers in shaping our beliefs and values. This can be a good or bad thing. When we grow up observing and modeling after our parents, we begin to pick up on things that they do. In turn, it causes us to have a certain perspective on certain things. One direct example of this would be parenting. Now look, I am not about to go into a rant on how to parent. I do not have any kids of my own, and I absolutely love my baby cousins, but I don't think that I could keep them and raise them, okay? That is not my lane yet. But one thing that I have realized now that I am a little bit older and looking at the next phase of my life, which might include having kids one day, it causes my perspective on parenting to shift. So naturally, when we get older and we start thinking about having kids and how we might parent those kids, we look at our own parents and we take the good and the bad and we mesh it all together so that it can be good in our eyes. But the example of this would be if a child grew up in an abusive household where they were physically abused. When they have kids of their own one day, they're probably not going to give their child a spanking or whoop them, as we always said it down here in Alabama, because they see that as extremely harmful and detrimental to the child's development, because it takes them back to their own childhood and their own trauma almost of what it was like getting hit by a parent and that fear that it instilled in them. That's an example of taking something that was really, really bad and turning it into something that's going to be really, really good for the future generation of their family. But this doesn't only have to be in bad scenarios. For example, with me, growing up, my mom made it very clear that I could always come to her if I had any sort of question, even if it was a little bit uncomfortable or maybe a little awkward. She never made me feel dumb or less than for not knowing the answer to something. That's such a good trait. And I want to make sure that I instill that in my future children one day and let them know that they can always come to me as their mother in the same way that I always went to her as my mother. And in turn, I gained her perspective on that, and it directly played into my actions because it's rooted in her values, which she passed down to me, which are now my values of having open and clear communication with our family. So we grow up with a perspective that is most likely inherited from an influential figure like a parent or a grandparent, and we watch it directly affect our actions. And then it's inevitable that in everyone's life, something's going to happen and it's going to cause a shift. Something that's always been good or always been bad is going to directly defy what you've always known. And this is what we call a perspective shift. Perspective shifts look different for everyone, but it's most commonly found when we have some sort of major life event. If you lose a family member or you break up with a long-term partner, your perspective's going to shift because it's all you've ever known, and now it's different. But there's also perspective shifts that come in the small one-liners or sermons, or maybe you watch a movie that just completely changes the way that you think. Personally, I've had a lot of perspective shifts in the last year, but I've had a lot of perspective shifts in the last week. Things just look differently for me now, and that's okay, but it's something that I do have to be hyper aware of because our perspective naturally changes as our brain develops. But a major life event can make you feel like something's just on pause, like the whole world's still spinning, but your world is completely still. And that's tough. It's so tough. If I knew how to get through it, I would tell you, but I don't. And whenever I don't know the answer to something, I can lean into two things. I can lean into Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, who came down as the Son of the living God and gave his life on the cross so that I could have eternal, lasting life in heaven alongside him. The other thing I tend to lean into is psychology. Let me just go ahead and be clear here. Jesus is much more fulfilling and usually gives me the correct answer before any website or article could. And the way that psychology looks at this, that as we mature cognitively, we become more capable of understanding multiple perspectives and developing a more complex worldview. And this is true. As we grow up, we get to see more of the world, and in turn, our viewpoints on a lot of different things changes. But there's also just something to note that as we mature, we also go through more life. We experience more things that are likely to shift our perspective. Emotionally, physically, visually, all of the elements. Our perspective can be changed just like that. So this raises two questions, two things for you to think about. How has your influential figure's perspective integrated your life? And how has your personal experience then shifted that perspective to create your current one? Once you really think about these questions, then you can begin to understand the power that comes with our perspectives. Our perspectives shape the way that we interact with others and the choices that we make each day. It truly serves as a lens through which we interpret our experiences. This influences both our emotions and our actions. So when we do enter into things that might challenge our perspective or shift it, we can respond in two different ways. We can be open and understand that maybe we might be wrong, or maybe something isn't supposed to be the way that we've always thought. Or we can absolutely refuse any kind of nuanced idea and almost get defensive at the idea that someone would even try challenging you on it. And I'm not telling you which way to respond, because I think the topic really matters when you respond a certain way. But personally, I always respond to any kind of challenge on my perspective with questioning. Are we surprised? I mean, I literally have a podcast here that's all about overthinking. I question anytime someone comes to challenge my perspective. I question their perspective, their comments, their facts, and then I begin to question my own perspective, my own thoughts, my own facts. If it's a scientific or political idea, then there's value in that research, right? We have research at the tips of our fingers. Open up Google, and within seconds, you have thousands of articles that are going to be speaking to a topic. If it's an emotional idea, then there's value in understanding the power that you hold with how you handle things. It goes back to the old saying that actions speak louder than words. It goes to show that how we react to our perspective being challenged is just as important to the perspective being changed. So don't just jump the gun, don't be defensive, but be open to the idea that maybe everything that I've always thought I haven't explored deep enough. Overall, if you didn't take anything away from this episode, I just want you to know that there's power in understanding your perspectives. There's power in understanding why I think or feel a certain way about a certain thing. That is what gets you back to the simple life of just saying, well, I understand myself and I understand that, so I'm going to go about it. But the simple life is not as simple as we may think, because what would be the point of this podcast if we didn't overthink something that was so simple? On my next episode, I'm going to be talking about the simple life, our idea of it, and how it's shifted now that social media thinks it's just living out on a farm. Is it really simple? Is life simple? Don't even get me started on that one yet. But if you want to hear me talk about it, I'll see you next time. That pretty much sums up my thoughts on that. Thank you so much for listening to the Thoughts I'm Still Having podcast. And hey, don't overthink it. Just go ahead and subscribe on anywhere that you get your podcast. You can stay connected with me on all social media platforms at @OliviaBritton_. Check out my website that's linked in the description of this episode. And I'll talk to you next time right here on Thoughts I'm Still Having.